encroach into those lots with a parking lot that, lo and behold, it turned out crossed a perpetual easement that just 5 years ago, the developer and the township had agreed to put in place. That could never be crossed by anything other than landscaping. No pavements, no buildings, no nothing. And the new building was actually going to cross that barrier, which is the berm that's there now, and parking was going to come beyond into the residential area. So when that didn't pass the zoning commission, because of that and the massiveness of the project, the developer came back with this secondary idea of putting a church in. It's something the developer had floated in discussions with me and others from the neighborhoods before the first large tower was put to the zoning commission. And we were told, maybe we'll put a church there. Well, now it's still, maybe we'll put a church there. They want to get approval for a church, but they don't have a church. My view of the project is it appears to be a 166 space parking lot with a speculative church accessory building at the end. Our view from the neighborhoods is this is a plan to put in a parking lot that will then be leased on weekdays when there's no church using it, maybe weekends if there's no church occupying the space either, to the Tri-Health building. And that is a danger to the neighborhoods. That's significant traffic during the daytime. Whether it's an employee lot where people are just in and out at shift change time, or actual additional parking for people using medical offices, that's a significant increase in traffic on Kugler Mill Road in the daytime. And that's the road we use to get to and from our offices, and what our kids use to get to and from school, as well as Mr. Brockman said. But it changes the character of the neighborhood completely, even putting a church there. And yes, there is a church across the street, of course, now. That was originally a synagogue when it was approved. They've run into some financial difficulties, apparently. But as Mr. Brockman noted, that was approved by the county in 1998. And I actually have audio, if you'd like to hear it, a minute from the trustee public hearing on that, on the current Tri-Health building. I can just paraphrase it, that's probably quicker, but the trustees voiced 5 years ago when they were looking at the Tri-Health building that went up there that's there now, that the impetus for the township taking over its own zoning and writing its own zoning resolution was that church, the synagogue that is now a church, and a few other projects approved at that same time in the 97, 98 timeframe. And because the county approved that over the township's strong objections, the township took this over for itself and gave you gentlemen a part-time job here, and gave the zoning commission a job as well. Before that, the county took care of these things. The township thought at the time, according to Mr. Weedman on the audio, who was on the zoning board at the time it happened, and then in 2014 he was recounting this, that they didn't think the buffers were big enough on the synagogue that went in. It was considered to be an encroachment. The neighbors behind it in Sturbridge considered it to be an encroachment. Many of them had flooding problems afterward as well. But it's a tiny footprint compared to what this new building will look like. So part of what I wanted to do with the slides, if Mr. Holbert would put them up, I wanted to walk through just a few things quickly there.
So I've got 5 different things here.
There's a PowerPoint and a PDF, either one will work, whichever is more convenient for you. PDF might be simpler, but if not, you can do PowerPoint. First of all, this is section 17.6 of our zoning resolution, and this governs the conditions that Mr. Eichmann went over at the beginning with everyone here as to what we understand that you gentlemen are looking at and determining whether this fits the character of the area or not. You need to make a finding, if you do approve this, that the conditional use is appropriate in the location proposed. And you may do that, but the resolution doesn't say you must do that or you shall do that. This is not a use of right by the property owner. This is something that you gentlemen have to determine if the evidence shows meets all of these conditions. So spirit and intent, it's got to comply with the spirit and intention of the zoning resolution with district purposes. It's got to be in harmony with the general and specific purposes for which this resolution was enacted. Well, as I noted, this resolution was enacted because the county was doing things like putting in the church across the street. That's something to consider as to the spirit and harmony of the neighborhood. The harmony of the neighborhood is overwhelmingly residential and somewhat bucolic, to use that term again. A large parking lot with a church accessory next to it is going to destroy that. The view through the parking lot will remain the Tri-Health building behind it as well. That didn't used to be the view until the developer bought those houses and tore them down. There should be no adverse effect. The proposed use and development shall not have an adverse effect on adjacent property or the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Now, I don't see any health effects there, probably no morals effect if it's a church, but in terms of the effect on the adjacent property, certainly the owners across the street weren't expecting something like this to go in. They thought they had what looked like farmhouses across there when they bought it. And no one's entitled to making everyone else around you keep the property the way it's been at the time you bought something, certainly. But with the zoning the way it was, I would think those property owners' expectation was it was going to stay residential there. The example of the houses around Moeller, by the way, they were tucked in and very tight and have small lots. Sure, they're like that, but the people who bought those went in knowing that. They purchased those willingly, expecting that to happen. But if you put in a high-rise right behind them suddenly, they probably wouldn't expect that. If the Mercedes wanted to put in a Carvana-type tower in their backyard to stack cars in, I think they'd be here talking to you gentlemen or the zoning commission too. That would just not be in character and have an adverse effect on the adjacent property. That's what this building will do as well. Safety, the traffic will have an impact on that for the reasons noted, and the general welfare of the community. It's going to change the character of Quigley Mill Road. Protection of public interest. The board should, and the development should respect to the greatest extent practicable the natural, scenic, and historic features of significant public interest. Again, the appearance of those lots was far different than it's going to look with the church. There were a lot more trees there too, but they got taken down too when the houses were taken down recently. There's an old well sitting in the middle of one of them. I don't know if it's actually a historic well or a decorative thing someone put in, but it's a big thing made of stones about this big around and about this tall. I don't know if it's a historic feature or not, but it's part of the feature of what those properties looked like. They were almost like farmhouses. So let's look at a few photos of the site here so you gentlemen are familiar with what's there too. Harry, if you could go to the next one, please. This is a view of the entrance of what is now Legacy Point Church and was originally the synagogue after it was approved in 1998 and constructed at that time. On the right side of the picture, you see trees. Those buffer between it and an old house that is basically abandoned that I understand the township's trying to take down. But it's very wooded between them there. There's a driveway, then there's immediately the guardrail leading up to 71 and trees there you can see. And although you can see it from the road as you go by, it's a very short view as you pass it. All of the parking is also behind it, and there's a huge buffer in the front between it and Kugler Mill Road, even for that narrow little window you see looking in there. Contrast that with the plans you've seen for this church, where you're going to be looking right into the parking lot as you drive by for 700 feet or so, as Mr. Brockman noted. Next slide, please, Mr. Holbert. So here now we've just spun around. Kugler Mill there is crossing 71. These are pictures from Google Maps Street View from 2017. That house you see there, the white one, was the closest one to the highway. It's gone now, along with all those trees around it. Maybe one is still there, but most are gone. There's another house next to it to the left, if we can go to the next slide. That house was there as well. As you drive by on Kugler Mill and pass these lots, you look to your right and you don't see a Tri-Health building looming behind it. You see a house and trees. The trees, the bushes on the right and the trees on the left are gone now. They've been torn down along with the house. Let's move to another one. Mr. Holbert, another slide, please.
Oh,
All right, here moving on. We see, I think there was a slight empty area where a house had come down by 2017 between them. More trees, and then let's move to another slide, Mr. Holbert, please. Thank you, and then we're looking at another house that was there, but is now gone. Again, fairly, not wooded, but certainly had a lot of greenery there in the lot. One more, please. And then this house here, I believe, is the one that is still standing. That is planned to be torn down. And the church will be sitting right on top of that and to its right in this picture. But again, very wooded around there. Somewhere back in there off to the right, I believe, is the well, maybe a little bit off screen to the right. That's a big change going from that to where we are now. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here we are again looking from the far end of those houses down to Kugler Mill Road. I-71 is at the far end of the road there. The entrance to Weatherfield Road into Sturbridge is just behind us to the right here. But again, even in 2017, looking down there, there were trees blocking the view, pretty residential on the right. Now we're looking at putting a church here. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the view now, or at least in winter when there was snow on the ground. Those houses are gone. The developer purchased all of them, knocked all this down. The residential character that was there has been at least destroyed for now. But imagine a big parking lot you're looking across there. That's the view we're all going to see from the neighborhoods, and the neighbors across the street from it are going to see that. And as we have the large parking lot and the church accessory to the left. So let's go to the next slide. This is an overview of the neighborhoods. I think Mr. Holbert showed you one that was zoomed in a little more in some ways. This is a map that Steve Ginn of the Sturbridge Homeowners Association, he's their treasurer, prepared. He couldn't be here this evening, he's out of town. But it's an overview of the residential areas that connect our neighborhoods. So on the left here, on the left side of 71, which is the east side, because we're looking south, you see you have the Sturbridge neighborhood along the Seasons Retirement Community, which is technically perhaps commercial or multifamily, but it's a residential community as well, with about 250 independent living apartments in there, and then a nursing facility as well. So you have Sturbridge, you get to Kugler Mill Road, you cross 71, and then working back down on the screen, you pass through Charter Oak. My neighborhood's on Whitechapel Drive, and then you continue into Heitmeyer Farms. And over to the right, you have a little yellow line around what's the empty field, and then the Township Administration Building where we are now. To the north, or actually the south of Kugler Mill Road, but the top of the screen there, you have Indian Creek Apartments, again, multifamily, but residential, and very peacefully so in the way it's laid out and heavily wooded, and then residential areas to the right. And then in the upper left in blue there, you have the Tri-Health Building, which is currently about as close as anything commercial gets to these neighborhoods. And then in red, that's the big area where the church or the parking lot and accessory church would go. And then right under that, across Kugler Mill Road, you see the much smaller item where the current church sits with its 25 space parking lot behind it. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the current zoning map of the area here, and you can see toward the middle at the bottom, the current Tri-Health Building is in blue, proposed zone changes marked off there in yellow. That's where we're talking about. Again, all of that yellow is residential. The orange and gray stripe is multifamily residential. This is the heart of the residential community on the eastern side, or southeastern side of the lower southern island of Sycamore Township. Let's go to the next slide. Here we have the land use plan, and Jack Flume will be talking about that in a moment, so I'm not going to go into any detail on that other than to show that this is the current plan, and you can see in yellow where this proposed church goes, it's planned as residential. Next slide, please. This is a visualization of the difference between the two churches and their frontages on Kugler Mill Road. Legacy Point has 174 feet of road frontage, much of it covered by trees or woods, and obscured by the angle you approach it from typically as well. But on the lower part of Kugler Mill Road, you see the applicant wants 770 feet of road frontage, most of which is parking lot along there. It's a radically different view and a radical change to the composition of Kugler Mill Road currently. Next slide, please. That's just another view of the neighborhoods in the area from the other direction. We'll skip that right now. Next one, please. That's a view of Legacy Point Church as it stands right now. And as you can see, the buffers around it, there's actually another parcel there as well outside of the blue lines, which is that funny triangle you see in black there, which is part of their lot. But they have significant greenery in the frontage of the place, and their parking is in the back. You just can't see it from the road. It's also a much smaller lot with a big buffer behind the parking lot as well. It's a much smaller building also, about a quarter the size of this proposed accessory church building that would go with the parking lot. Now, next slide. This is part of the application, and the applicant tells us they're pursuing potential churches. Now they say they think they have a church lined up, and if not, there's a backup, which means they don't have the person lined up. There's backup as well. Building plans will be developed that'll show how the design of the building will fully comply. This is all in the future, but this is a speculative church box drawing. There are no plans, but they promise it'll be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and they'll conform to all zoning criteria for building design, aesthetics, architectural character, so on and so on. Which part of the neighborhood? Would that be Sturbridge? Would that be Kugler Meadows across the street? Would it be compatible with the Tri-Health Building behind it instead? With the hotel across the highway or Indian Creek? What's it going to be compatible with? We don't know, because you don't have a complete application. You have a box drawn on the ground as an accessory to a parking lot that is definitely drawn out. This is not a complete application, and it will destroy the composition of the neighborhood, frankly. Next slide, if you could. Here's a close-up in part of the parking lot that's been proposed for this project. And spaces are drawn out in there. And circled, you'll see the two walkways that run through to the Tri-Health building for some unexplained reason. They're not focused upon at all anywhere in the application, but they are in the drawings. Now, the one on the left doesn't cross the perpetual buffer that is never to be crossed by any form of construction whatsoever, but the one on the right does. It goes right through the middle of it. So they're planning to pave through that apparently, and I guess grade that, because right now there's a berm that goes up and down. Well, that's forbidden by the covenant that Mr. Kubicki and the township agreed to put in place 5 years ago. It's just not allowed, and it's a great danger. And this, in fact, does create a danger to the community, because you may think we're all speculating that, oh, they're going to use the parking lot for this, but why are these things going in there? It's a big temptation, certainly, to lease that parking lot in the daytime to try health on weekdays. That's what church uses it. I will do that. Is there a plan to lease this to try health?
Will you put up a wall around it?
Excuse me. Let him continue, and at the end, we'll answer any
Well,
questions.
actually, this is about the right point. I was going to ask that question anyway, so can someone answer that?
There was some people that complained about the church across the street and said it was underparked. We thought that we would provide excess parking for the weekends, in case there's too much parking or too many people, that they could utilize the office park. The church right here is all we're talking about. That's it. We're not here to discuss, we got beat on the zoning. We concede, we lost. This is Plan B. This is not a speculative project. We have provided a complete application, and we're looking for you guys to vote based upon, the information that you have. They've given you 10 reasons to turn us down. Brockman gave you 10 reasons to turn us down. If this church spends $100,000 on architecture and says they're gonna build a Sistine Chapel, he'd still give you 10 reasons to turn it down. Why would they spend $100,000 on architecture just to hear these people sit here and say that we're ruining the neighborhood again?
It's a parking lot.
And the question,
We
it
offered
isn't answered yet?
a different plan. You guys didn't like it. This is our Plan B. It fits into the current.
Are you,
conditions
are
out
you,
there.
are you willing to enclose the parking lot so that it cannot be used?
We're willing to
These two
build
gentlemen
this.
have the floor, please.
If I may, is there any plan in place to prevent use of the parking lot?
We're here to
for a building?
discuss this plan right here. That's all.
There are no plans whatsoever for that. All right, next question. The churches that are lined up as the potential church and the potential backup church, is the plan to sell to those churches or to lease the space to them?
We don't have that specifically outlined yet.
Okay, well, clear, I mean, if there.
Would it make a difference?
Well,
Actually,
if there's a church that you're looking at that you think is a hot prospect here, but you also have a backup, is it a hot prospect for purchasing the ground or for renting the ground?
I don't know whether they're gonna get financing on it. I don't know if they're gonna pay cash. I don't know if they're gonna lease it. I don't know what they're gonna do.
So there's a possibility that Five Star Equity would continue to own the property with the church occupying it as a tenant leasing it.
There's a chance anything could happen.
Okay. In which case, Five Star Equity would be in control of the use of the parking lot as well.
We're
Correct.
here to talk about this plan.
That,
I don't know. if
thank you, that doesn't answer the question though. If Five Star Equity is leasing to someone, it would still own the parking lot and,
Top, whether it's an office building, a commercial building, a church, an industrial building, a house, everything's on the table, whether they wanna lease, own, what have
I don't know who's gonna finance it. I
you.
don't know who's
You
gonna
don't
lease
know,
it.
you don't know, but that, there's no nefarious.
Pardon, you're gonna have to identify yourself.
I'm David Kubicki, I'm also part of
Because
this.
she's trying to keep record of all.
I apologize, I apologize. There's no plan for any of it, so
We lost. This is Plan B.
if you have a piece of land, you may sell it, you may lease it, you may get a tenant, you may get a buyer, you may get anything. It is what it is, and there is no plan.
in which case I would submit that confirms there is a significant danger that there may be a church tenant leasing the space, Five Star Equity in control of it, and able on weekdays to put in place a leasing agreement with the Tri-Health building next door, which they also developed and wanted to develop a larger building there. The added danger from that is, with 166 leased parking spaces next door, when they come back to put up the second Tri-Health tower, that we were told would not fit on the lot in any other configuration other than spilling into these lots because they couldn't get enough parking there otherwise. They suddenly have a solution to the parking problem and reason to be granted a parking variance because they've got parking across the berm that no one's supposed to cross. Now, this is speculative, admittedly, but it creates a danger that wouldn't be there at all if this was residential, which is the appropriate character for that neighborhood. It would also, residential houses would also bring in greater tax revenues, frankly, to the township, which isn't a consideration, I don't think, for the BZA, but it is for the township residents. But I have another question now that Mr. David Kubicki has spoken
What
of.
you said about the tax revenues, what'd you say? I thought you said about the houses versus the church.
Church, I understand, would not be paying property taxes. Five Star would, if you still owned it, of course, correct?
But I just, what you said that the church would have a negative impact, economic development wise compared to the houses.
No, I said a church wouldn't be paying taxes and a house would.
Correct. That's what I thought I heard.
Okay. Next question for Mr. David Kubicki, though. You're a trustee in Columbia Township, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Who does zoning for Columbia Township?
Howard County.
And who administers zoning for Columbia Township?
Why is this relevant, may I ask, Mr. Chairman?
It
I'm
will
just trying to
be,
get
it will be very clear in just one moment. Who does that?
Who administers it?
Yes.
I guess I don't know the answer to that question.
All right. Columbia Township has a contract with Sycamore Township for administering its zoning, doesn't it?
No, we do not.
Well, Mr. Holbert is frequently at your trustee meetings, isn't he, and at zoning meetings?
No, but he's got nothing, he's a.
I attended 2 meetings, but let's clarify. Sycamore Township has a property maintenance contract with Columbia Township to do property maintenance only. We have nothing to do with their zoning.
I stand corrected, but you do perform work in your capacity as a Sycamore Township employee through that contract for Columbia Township and interact with Mr. Kubicki, don't you?
Chairman, I would say that we, in order,
We're drifting.
consideration of time, we need
We're
to
drifting.
facts.
We got lots of residents. and-
Sure, let me finish up here. My point is simply that Mr. Holbert gave a rosy review, it appeared, from our perspective as to this, and he also reports to Mr. Kubicki.
I take offense to that, Mr. Chair.
I don't get, I think that's totally out of question in this meeting and out of character for someone to come in and start making accusations in a meeting. And it certainly isn't helping us understand you as a
Sure, and I'm not
representative. That
suggesting-
doesn't make sense.
I'm not suggesting he's doing that intentionally, but we're all biased toward people that we have affinity for, that's my point. I'll move
Well,
on.
is that what I'm supposed to assume in your comments in there? You're biased about something? What are you telling me?
If you had reason to think that, I would think you would.
Well, you just state.
Exactly.
All right, finish it.
Sure, I did.
I'm not gonna play word games with